Okay, welcome, beautiful souls, to another fabulous episode of the Faith Fitness Joy podcast. Today's episode is episode 133 called Moving in Faith. It is the first in a series, a length of which is yet to be determined. I am your host and coach, Rochelle Renee. I really think you are going to love today's episode as well as this series that I am kicking off with today's episode. But before we dive in, a huge thank you to all of my subscribers, whether you are subscribing on your favorite podcast app or on my YouTube channel or both. I appreciate all of you. I really appreciate your support. If you would like to support the show, you can use the link in the description or in the comments here on Facebook. You can make a contribution of your choice. Any amount, anything helps and is really greatly appreciated. So thank you to those of you who make contributions, and thank you in advance if you choose to contribute. And last but not least, if you aren't already, please make sure that you like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others. I really have a goal. I have a goal of reaching 10,000 subscribers, and I would greatly appreciate your help in getting me there. So if you enjoy this show, please make sure you subscribe if you're not already and share with others that you think would enjoy it. So, all right, all of that said, welcome to today's episode of Faith Fitness Joy. I am kicking off a series, as I mentioned. I'm calling it Moving in Faith. At least for right now, that's what I'm calling it. And I'm just really excited about this. I think it's also going to become a course in some respects as I move through this series and as things come through over the coming weeks. And I think it's really going to help a lot of people. And I've just been really on fire about this all day today. I've been kind of receiving this over the last several weeks. And it's just started to get really a lot more clear and cohesive as I've gotten closer and started to really land on doing this series that I'm kicking off. Like I said, I've been on fire about this all day. And first and foremost, I'm going to give all glory to the Most High God right here and right now. Before we even start, I will probably say that multiple times throughout the series, because without Him, without God, I don't know where I would be. And I am just a vessel through which God is moving and speaking in this series. Ultimately, the inspiration to do this and the call to do this came from Him. And I literally just started receiving this in the past week or so, as I mentioned. And today, the Spirit has just been moving through me so strongly. Like I said, I've just been amped up all day about different things. And also about kicking off this series. It's just like this stage I'm in at the moment where kind of things are starting to come together and make sense after a very long period of chaos and just moving through a lot of things. And I often describe the last couple of years as like this one long, never-ending tower moment in my life. If you're familiar with tarot, you know what I'm talking about. However, I now understand that this is a ministry, and this ministry that I'm going to be going into in these coming weeks really began about 10 years ago. And like I said, it started to become crystal clear to me that God has been developing this ministry through all that I have been through in the past 10 years, and even through my whole life in some aspects. And some of that will come in when we get to different other episodes in this series and kind of dive deeper into some of these other topics that I'm going to be covering in this series. But for today, I am just kind of laying the foundation for the upcoming weeks and episodes of the series. I feel like it's really important to kind of lay this foundation first for the series, and just kind of some groundwork, if you will, to help with kind of giving you like a primer, sort of a combination of things, some of which is like the stuff that I've come through that have like led me to all of the revelations and insights that I'm going to be sharing through this. And some of it is also looking back on this 10-year cycle and seeing like there's always been this sort of, there's always this process to these seasons and these walks in faith that I've experienced. And I think it's not just for me. I think it's things that everyone that moves through some sort of a storm or leap of faith or something like that experiences these same things as well. And then the last thing is just to kind of, I guess you could say, tee up a little bit where this is ultimately going to go, and part of why I believe God has led me to do this series and take a deeper dive into some of these things. So as I mentioned, we're just laying the foundation for right now. I'll be going deeper into some of the specific topics. So with that in mind, what I want to start with today is that faith is a process of remembering who we truly are, or at least it's kind of an outcome, if you will, of moving through faith and spiritually growing. And what do I mean when I say remembering who you truly are? Because that might sound kind of strange, right? And I remember, like, every time I've heard that over the years, it's kind of like, like, what exactly does that mean? So I'm referring to the fact that you are not your body, you're not your name, you're not your mind. Yet this is what most of us think that we are. It's the things that come to mind when we think of who we are. And as a person, and what we maybe what comes to mind for us as our identity, if we are asked about it. But it isn't who you really are. You are a fractal of the Most High. You are a fractal of God, source, whatever label you want to insert there. We are all fractals of this one source, the creator of everything. And because you are a part of God, you are also God. You are a unique expression of God. You are also like this unique individual expression of God having an experience in the world, and you are also everyone else. And we're all one because we are all fractals of God, like I said. So the notion that we're all separate and less than God and not from God, or less than, is actually not from God. It's a concept that we get from the world. It's something that the world teaches us, something largely that comes from religion. So the world has given us this false perception of separateness from God. Religion has a lot to do with this, as I said a second ago. And I'm not here to attack anyone's religion. I've identified with several different religions over the course of my life. I was raised Catholic. I spent a good chunk of my life as a Wiccan. And in later years, I was called back into Christianity. And I would say at this point in my life, I don't really subscribe to any particular religion, because, like I said, I've come to kind of see that it's not, religion is kind of what has created this perception of separateness for most of us, a concept that we are separate from God, when that is not the case. You're not separate from God. You aren't separate from the person next to you, and you aren't separate even from your own spirit. Yet I think most of us, whether we're conscious of it or not, operate as if we are, and believe that we are. I know I believed that for a long time. And I believe this is part of why we are all here, is to remember this, and that life is a process of shedding all of these layers of conditioning that we sort of amass around ourselves from the time that we enter this world. So if you have started this process, this is going to speak to you. Your spirit is going to be responding to this. You may even feel this in your body as you listen to the series and this episode. And if not, it may sound really far out there. It may be like, what the heck is this lady talking about? Or it might go over your head completely and may not land at all. And all of that's okay. And I get it, because there was a time that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about did not truly land for me. And there was a time where a lot of this would have gone over my head as well. But I can say that I've always had this desire for truth. I remember a moment years ago. I can't pinpoint exactly like what point in time it was years ago. It was before I was divorced, so it was probably greater than 10 years ago. But I remember this moment where I was sort of like between religions, and I asked God, please show me what's true. I want to know you, God. I want to know what's right. I want to know, you know, what's true. And this part of this, like, I was coming from this place of, like I said, I was raised Catholic, so there was like this, heavy, like, um fear of hell and sin and like what happens after we die kind of a thing that I got from that, and even from Christianity. But then over the years I studied different religions, and I was practicing different religions at different points in time, again because I was always kind of searching for truth. And I really, what I realize now, I was seeking God. But you don't really get that from a religion, not truly, because if you're honed in and hyper focused on the religion, there's always a doctrine and rules, and this is how you're supposed to do it, and this is the ultimate truth. Like, they all present themselves as like the truth or the way or whatever, right? And I get, there's, that's kind of the nature of it, but you're focusing in on this so much that you're not necessarily developing a relationship with God. It's not to say that if you're in a religion you can't, but at least for me, like, especially when I think back on when I was, being raised Catholic, like, I just remember it was like you go to church and you go through these motions. If you're familiar with Catholic Mass, it's a process. It's like you come in and there's like kind of the greeting and the opening prayer, and then you're kneeling down and doing another prayer, and then you're standing up for another prayer, and then there's like a focused excerpt of the Bible of the day that the priest is focusing in on, and you kind of going through all these things. But I was seeking more of this feeling. I wanted to experience God. I wanted, it was just, it's one thing to do all of these things and go through these processes and motions in a church in a service, but it's another thing to awaken your spirit and to truly feel connected to God in that way. And that was something that would not come from me until much later. And that's what this prayer that I'm sharing that I had made years ago, where it was really coming from and where I was really going with it. And I was asking him, for this truth, like, lead me to the truth. I want to know what it is. And I said, I can't find my way in the noise of all these different religions, all of these religions and I don't know, practices, whatever you want to call it, that claim to be right, that claim to be the thing. Um, and that was kind of the gist of it, right? And then I sort of forgot about it. I just like went on with my life and day-to-day stuff, whatever, and I kind of forgot about it, but God didn't. And I didn't really know that at the time, of course, right? But God started me down the path to truth from that moment forward. And I can see that clearly now. But of course, again, at the time that that I wasn't conscious of it. But looking back, I can remember it started with like this random urge to start reading the Bible and understanding the Bible for myself. Now that's all. Today is not really about going into the Bible or a specific religion, as I mentioned. I'm just sharing that's kind of like where he took me next in answering this prayer of, show me the truth, God. I want to understand you. I want to know you, and I just want to know the truth. So today is sort of a primer for the series, as I mentioned. So let's step back a little bit now and kind of sharing a bit about this past 10 years, right, of my life. Has been marked by several seasons in which I had to move in faith. And as a result of my doing that, my spiritual growth like furthered, right? As I'm, moving through faith. So as I mentioned, there were 7 seasons in this 10-year cycle that started almost a year and a month ago to this day. This is August 14th, 24. So this 10-year cycle started with the ending of my marriage, right? My ex-husband moved out in July of 2014. I was pregnant with our second child, which is my daughter, at the time that he moved out. And I made a little note here for myself because there were certain parts of the Bible that God was taking me through at these different seasons. And so these books in the Bible or parts of the Bible kind of marked I guess you could say, kind of the lessons or the milestones in my spiritual growth, if you will. So in this first part, when it, with the divorce, it was Genesis, the story of Joseph, and Exodus. The second season was the death of my father, which was in late 2015, and God positioning me to be sort of this spiritual rock for my family at the time. And so this was really like bringing it all full circle back to Joseph and the story of Joseph, but a little bit of Exodus as well. And then the third season was when I got pregnant with my third child and the subsequent disappearance of his father after I found out that I was pregnant. And it was kind of in between this season and the next season that I was led to the book of Daniel. And so I was doing a lot of study on the book of Daniel, and I was also called at that time to start doing prayer fasts for the first time. So that was kind of how that started, with doing my first Daniel fast. So then the fourth sort of season was this heartbreak I went through that seriously almost took me out. It was pretty brutal. But it also, interestingly, set me on the path to my healing. So even though it was like the almost took me out, it also set me on the path of my healing. The fifth season was getting my dream job and then realizing that it wasn't really everything that I had dreamed of. And that was my Esther season. So that was, the book of Esther was very like where God was leading me through at that time. The sixth season was moving from my lifelong home in Sacramento, California to Montana. Today is exactly 2 years since we moved. We left in August of 2022. We got here in Montana August 14th, 2022. And the seventh season was when God called me out of my last job in October last year, despite not having a new job and not having any income coming in through my business. And so the two books that have been very prevalent or prominent for me in this recent year has been Job and Exodus. And so again, I'm not going to go deep into any of that today, but kind of laying the foundation, because some of these things I will circle back to in the series coming up, particularly these books and some of the things that the revelation that I pulled from moving through these seasons. But we'll also cover different aspects of moving in faith and sort of walking by the Spirit and spiritual growth as well. So looking back on all of this now, I can see that there's a process to every season of faith, and it's always very similar, and they all have these 7 stages, and it's pretty linear actually. Like these things follow in this order in my experience. So the first one is the triggering event, right? So like the first season I mentioned, obviously that was my divorce. That was the triggering event. When it came to God calling me out of my job, the more recent season I went through, the triggering event was like him kind of calling me out of it. But even before that, like I was just going through I was just struggling in that job. So that was kind of the triggering event in that case. But each one of these seasons had a triggering event. The second stage is the leap itself, right? So you have the triggering event, and from that triggering event, you basically have a decision to make where you're going to stay or you're going to jump off that ledge and trust that God is going to catch you. Trust that you are at that ledge for a reason and it is safe to take that leap. So that's the second stage. The third one is starting on the path, right? So you've taken the leap, you are embarking on this walk in faith now, and you're starting on your path. And in this stage, the road will rise to meet you. So this is the stage where it's like you're taking the steps and the path unfolds before you as you take each step. This is also where you will experience synchronicities and serendipity, and a lot of other things will start to kind of happen. It's almost like God's dropping these little breadcrumbs along the way as you're walking along, or little things are popping up to help you find your way on your path, right? And then comes the storm. So that's number 4, the storm, but also the calm that comes with the storm. So assuming that you are staying close to God as you are doing this, right? That is key through all of this, right? Like, I mean, if you're going to do this, you better make sure that you are staying connected to him, and however that looks for you, prayer, meditation, whatever, right? But you want to make sure you're staying close and connected to God, because as you do this, it's going to give you the supernatural peace that you are going to need in order to move through the storm. So I will never forget this. When I was going through my divorce, I was in my current position in my job at that time. I think I was like in my 2nd year or something. Something like that. I was pregnant with my daughter, but I hadn't told anyone at work yet. And I didn't want to tell anyone at work about going through the divorce either, because I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to get a promotion if they knew I was pregnant and going through a divorce. Now I know like that's illegal and like whatever, but like this is where my mind was, right? So I was just, I can't even explain it. It was such a strange space to be in my life, where it's like, because in a lot of ways it was unexpected. Like there was a triggering event and there was things leading up to it, yes, but like I just never saw myself doing that, and so everything had to start to change as I started to embark on this, right? So it was just chaos. It felt like my life was like this giant tornado, and like all the pieces of my life were swirling around me. And it was a giant mess and a whirlwind. And I'm just like standing there in the middle of it, but yet I wasn't afraid of it. It's like, it's hard to explain, but I get this vision every time I talk about this of me in the middle of a tornado or a hurricane, and like all of the noise of the storm and the chaos of that storm is swirling all around you, but it's like you're in this bubble and you feel safe, and you have this inexplicable peace that it can't be from anything but God. I don't know where else something like that would come from when you are in the midst of such a scary, destructive, painful time in your life, right? So that is what the storm is. And there's always some form of the storm and the supernatural peace that comes with it when you're moving through faith and staying very close to God. The 5th sort of stage is the crumbling and humbling, I like to call it, because like I said, it's like all of your reality, all of these pieces of whatever is relevant to this season of faith that you're moving through, various aspects of your life are going to crumble down and fall apart around you. And it is going to be very humbling. And there's a lot of stuff that you are going to be stripped of. And it can be a very painful and humbling process, as I mentioned. However, it has a purpose. It's not futile. It's not pointless. It's God clearing the way of all the crud so he can give you the better. He can build new. He can restore and renew, and remove all of this stuff that you kind of built around yourself, in the process of creating whatever it is in your reality that that you're taking a leap of faith away from or out of, let's say. So that's the 5th stage. The 6th stage is kind of feeling your way or finding your way as you're walking along your path, walking blindly. So this is like the walking by faith, not by sight. This is kind of like the way my spirit team and God was kind of helping me understand it in these recent months was like, it's like an initiation. And it's like you're blindfolded and you're trying to find your way and you have no idea if you're on the right track. God is very quiet at this time, but he's present. So it can be scary at times. And there's definitely moments where you're like, where are you, God? Like, what the hell? And this is the part where you start questioning, like, what have I done? Did I make a giant mistake? maybe God wasn't really calling me out to do this. Like, oh my God, all of that stuff starts to come up in this stage. But it's part of God is stepping back and being quiet, because it's the part of the stage is about you building up your intuition and learning to rely on the spirit within you, and on your own inner compass that he has provided all of us when he created each of us. As I mentioned before, we're all fractals of God. We all have a spirit, and we are a spirit in a physical body. So that's what 6 is all about. It's about the kind of learning to detach from the need to have all of these answers, and looking outside of yourself and learning to go within and feeling your way through that part of your path and that part of your journey. And then the 7th thing is the rebuild and restoration phase. So that's, you've kind of come through all of this, you're coming out on the other side, you've made it through the storm, all of the stuff that needed to be shed and removed and taken out of the picture, so God can answer your prayer, basically. So God can give you what you're trying to achieve through this whole process. Now the rebuild and restoration can start to happen, because you've reached that sort of phase, and that's what time it is when you kind of get to this point in the journey. So also in reflection in this past 10-year cycle of my life, and these 7 seasons of spiritual growth that I just described and that I've walked through, I can see that there were specific areas of my life that were impacted in particular, right? And so, and maybe this is the part where I'm not sure how it looks like. I don't know that this would be the same for everybody. And I inclined to think that a lot of this has to do with the things that me in particular needed healing around. So in my case, it was finances, relationships, and myself / spirit dynamic. Like, sort of this, there was aspects of self-worth, there was aspects of self-assurance, like, like overcoming self-doubt, and doubting myself and my abilities. And then there was aspects of letting the ego die. Like, this is the part where, for me, a lot of the themes in all of these seasons, there was a large element of ego death, dark night of the soul, that kind of thing. And that has to happen so that your spirit can become more dominant, that it can become the louder aspect of yourself, and you're not being led as much by your ego, which most of us are, because we're conditioned to do that, and I'll get to that in a second. But rather allowing the spirit to become greater within you. So that was kind of the other thing I took away from looking back on this 10-year cycle. So this takes me to kind of the last aspect of the foundation that I want to lay for you in this first episode of the series, which is going back to where I started at the beginning. And that is that it's a process of remembering who you really are. We come into this life remembering and knowing who we are, which is a spirit, a fractal of God, coming from source, being with source and other spiritual beings before we enter this world. But our memory of this is erased, and as our life becomes like this journey to recall the truth of who we really are. And I know there's other works out there and authors that I believe Dolores Cannon talks about this in some of the work that she's done, and others that I can't remember right now. But that aside, I recently had a hypnotherapy or hypnosis session with someone that I've been working with, who's been helping me moving through some things that some of my own healing, let's say, for lack of a better term. So I had this hypnosis session with her. And in this session, I remembered my birth. But I didn't just remember my birth, I remembered where I was before I came into the world. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but I'm going to share some of what's relevant to this whole topic, and what I'm talking about when I say remembering who we are. I can remember being in a different place with other beings, and I did not want to leave. And I did not want to come here because I felt such a tremendous feeling of love. It was so overwhelming and like there's not enough words to describe it. The only thing that's ever come close is when God has shown me, like given me the feeling that he feels for people. There was a time in one of my seasons I mentioned before where he just like downloaded his love. And that's what this feeling was. And I remember experiencing that in this hypnosis. And I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to come here, but at the same time, I was like at peace with it because I had accepted that I had agreed to come into the world. But like I said, there was this tremendous feeling of love, and like I didn't want to leave. And that feeling and that of love that I was experiencing where we come from, like that was why I didn't want to come into the world. That's why I didn't want to leave. Then I remember what appeared to be like going through a portal or a tunnel. It's hard to explain. It was like, I don't know how to explain it other than that. It was like some sort of a portal or tunnel. I had a sensation of like kind of falling down or sliding down like this tunnel. And I could see the beings and the place where I was like getting further and further away from me. And again, it was kind of like this feeling of peace, like, okay, here we go. Like off I go into this life. And then the next thing I remember was waking up in my mom's arms, and I could see like part of my mom's nightgown, like her hospital gown. And then the memory jumped a little bit more, and I remember like there was this whole other memory of the first time that my dad held me. And so I'll leave it at that for this episode, but like the story anyway, because again, it's just kind of to help with solidifying this point, right? That there's more to us, and we're not just this physical body. And most of us can't remember our early childhood, let alone our births, right? Like I don't know, I, other than having experienced this hypnosis, that I would have ever had that memory at all. But it confirmed what I'm saying, that we forget who we truly are, and that faith is how we can find our way back to that truth. And as we grow from a baby to a child to a teen to an adult, we become more and more and more and more of the world. And we become more rooted in our worldly identity. And it's all part of, growing up and conditioning. And it's just it's the reality of the world that we're in. But we get rooted in the worldly identity, which is not our true identity. It's just what we're conditioned to believe is our identity. And that's things like our body, our mind, our name, our background. And that's what being of the world means. It's like, it means that you are aligned with your identity in the sense of these constructs that are only have meaning here. They're only things that have meaning because people, society, culture, whatever, give it meaning. But other than that, there's no meaning to it. So they're false, and they're actually the root of all of our problems and pain and all these things, because again, it's false, and it only has relevance or comes about because of this experience in the body and this perception that we have as being in this body, and having a mind and an ego and all of those things that like we're here in this life to learn how to start navigating, kind of separating ourselves from those things and remembering that we are actually a spirit residing in this body. So aligning ourselves with the world, being conditioned as we are, and forgetting the truth sort of creates this false perception, as I mentioned, of separateness from God, number one. Also separateness from each other. And this is what Yeshua was getting at when in a lot of his teachings. Love your brother as yourself, that love your neighbor as yourself, the same thing in the commandments, right? Like that's what we are all, because we're all from the same source, and we're all, in that sense, we are all connected. But being in the world, we're taught that we're separate and individual and all this and that. And again, it goes back to these identities and these things that we're conditioned to like connect to. So being of the world, rooted in the world, it kind of looks like these following things. So these are some of the characteristics of like when you are primarily rooted in your ego and your identity as a human body, and of the world. And we all have some iteration of all of these, right? And it's a process of separating ourselves from these things. So the first one is basing your worth or others' value on things like looks, money, the type of job or title that a person has or that you have, your status, wealth, affluence, race, religion, political views, or political affiliation, like all of these little categories that we create to put people and ourselves in. Another one is perceiving yourself as separate from God, from your own spirit, and from other people. Another one is judging, which is also known as this need to categorize and organize these different aspects of ourselves and other people. And so this looks like comparison, condemnation, superiority or inferiority, black or white thinking, or thinking in absolutes, competition, conditions, and the list goes on. But that's some of the aspects of judging and what that looks like. Another aspect is clinging on to things. And so this can look like, again, like really holding tightly to titles and putting so much value on a certain title or status or station in life or society or culture. Money, wealth, lack. When you're clinging to it, like it's so important to you. I mean, there's a difference between, yes, you need money to exist in reality, because that's how we operate in the world. But when it's this level of importance that we give to it, and clinging to it so tightly, which is based in a feeling of lack and not having enough, and the belief that there's not enough of anything. Same thing with clinging to things like your home or your house, where you live, your car, relationships, and people. We can even hold on to these for too long, when sometimes God is trying to lead you away from it because it's not serving you, and other material things, right? So those are some of the ways that looks. And then another indicator of being too in the world, or of the world, is idolizing, right? So celebrities, politicians, money, leaders, that can include pastors, priests, bosses, mentors, symbols or groups. Like, so again, it's when we're having these things up on this pedestal, and there's a concept of greater than, less than, separate, higher than, lower than, like that kind of thing, and putting a greatness on these things that is not real. It's only a perception that we create in our mind. So I'm going to leave it at that for this first episode of the series. Again, this is kind of the foundation and the primer, and where I want, like I said, the primer, because a lot of where we're going with this in this series is going to dive deeper into some of these different aspects of walking in faith and spiritual growth that I touched on in this episode, but also ultimately helping with leading through this process of remembering and really understanding on a deep spiritual level that we are all a spirit. We are all a spirit residing in a physical body that enables us to operate in this world, as opposed to identifying as this physical body that enables us to operate in this world. So each of the series is going to go a little deeper into different aspects of moving in faith and spiritual growth, as I mentioned. And my intention for the series is to really pull from all of these experiences from this 10-year cycle that I've just come out of, that I've just ended, and share the revelations from that 10-year cycle, but also to provide some practical information to help others that are moving through their own storm, or about to take their own leap of faith, or maybe you're in the midst of a storm, or you're in that, what did I call it? That stage where you're trying to find your way and feel your way, and questioning, what you've done and if you're on the right track. So that's really what I'm doing, what I want this to help with, and provide sort of a resource for people in that regard. So that's what's ahead in this series. Again, it's still to be determined how many episodes I'm going to do in this series, but that's where this is going to go. And so that concludes today's episode of the Faith Fitness Joy podcast. I would really love to hear from you, especially, any of your own experiences with like faith and moving through faith. What resonates from this that I've shared for you? Um, is there anything you would add to some of the lists that I've shared or not, or just, what speaks to you? I'd love to hear that. So please share your thoughts in the comments, whether it's here on the Facebook Live or on my YouTube channel or in the podcast. And also, as always, if you find this helpful and you want to continue the pursuit of faith, fitness, and joy with me, please like and subscribe. And you can also find Faith Fitness Joy on Facebook and Instagram, and check out the website as well, because I do have a blog at faithfitnessjoy.com. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I look forward to continuing to move in faith with you over the course of this series, and I will see y'all in the next episode. Have a great and wonderful Wednesday.